Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily podcast. I'm your host, and today we're going to be delving into the heart of the software and platforms industry with a special guest, Kevan Yalowitz, and he's the global lead for software and platforms over at Accenture. And in this ever-evolving landscape of technologies, companies face a myriad of challenges and opportunities, particularly in the realm of innovation, growth, and internal dynamics. And Kevan brings with him over 15 years of experience advising and growing companies at the intersection of business and technology, making him the perfect guide to navigate through the complexities of this dynamic industry. And he's also going to provide us with a roadmap of 4 essential pillars that every company should prioritise to embrace the next chapter of growth. From leveraging generative AI to enhancing user experiences and fostering greater employee engagement, we'll explore together how organisations can unlock their true potential from within. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way stateside, where today's guest is waiting to join us. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'd love to. My name's Kevan Yalowitz, and I am the software and platform industry lead at Accenture. And I think that industry name is somewhat intuitive, but that's basically where we work with digital natives, some younger, some older, and then all of our SaaS clients as well. And it's, as you well know, you have a podcast on this topic. It's a fascinating space that changes just about every quarter. And it's an area of our business that we've really been investing in for well over, it's become, frankly, one of our largest industries at Accenture. And as part of that, and I think this is maybe less known, we've really become part of the fabric of tech and Silicon Valley, both enabling operational growth in both the front office and back office. You think about the massive complexity required as you grow a business from $1 billion or $500 million in revenue to where many players are now in this space. And there's a lot of complexity, both in the front office, the back office, and even in parts of the organization that may seem less obvious, like engineering. And we're also the largest digital agency in the world. So we do lots of work with clients, helping to make their product more customer friendly, in certain cases, acting as an actual advertising agency of record for them. And then we've been fortunate enough as well to work with our clients on big strategic bets to de-risk their next growth wave. And that spans new products, new markets, and sometimes it's forecasting. Where do we think tech's going to go and how should we place our bets? So it's a really fun part of our Accenture world, but also the economy at large.
And knowing where to place those bets is incredibly daunting and overwhelming for a lot of people. It is an exciting time right now, especially with the way technology is helping speed up hypergrowth for businesses.
I think you would agree with this, but it feels that, in this space, the pace of change over the past 20 years has been quite rapid. But over the past 3 years or so, it's really accelerated. And I think that's actually represented in some of the folks you talk to on a daily basis. And we sort of see it in the industry and hear it from our clients.
100%. First of all, there was the COVID thing, and almost overnight, everyone having to work from home at scale globally. And things moved pretty quickly then. But you kind of thought, well, okay, we're moving fast now. We didn't see this coming. And then AI just kind of blindsided everyone, didn't it? And over the last 18 months too.
Yeah, it did, which is somewhat fascinating because for those that have been immersed in this space, AI is not new, right? We've seen players large and small, and this is something that the CEO of Google, Amazon, Microsoft has all said publicly recently. This has been something that's been going on behind the scenes for them for a decade, right? So many are further ahead than I think most think. And then there's also a bit of a line blurring that's happening between what's generative AI and what's AI. And obviously generative AI depends on really good AI, which has a lot of other dependencies that are hard to stand up that are now getting solved really quickly.
Yeah, and I think it's that adoption thing, that mainstream adoption. It just needs something to secure that. We look at other technologies, maybe blockchain and some of the Web3 stuff that equally has so many great promises and has been around for 10 years, but it's still waiting for that huge adoption piece, aren't we?
Yeah, no, that's right. But I think with generative AI, it feels like we're entering the middle miles, if you will. And I don't run marathons. Do you run marathons?
I've done a half, but that was a long time ago.
Well, you can still apply this analogy in a half. I mean, at the beginning of the race, I do 5 and 10Ks, not real marathons. Yeah. But at the beginning of the race, there's all this excitement. You're out of the gate, and your pace is, unless you're really, really diligent, is probably a little faster than what you might like. And then you get to the middle miles where you really have to slog it out. And I think that's where we currently are with generative AI. The excitement is obviously bubbling in the background, but now it's time to get moving to make this real. And some of the realities of what it takes to have great generative AI, i.e. clean data or data that's not fragmented and disparate across organization, that's hard stuff that takes time. And a lot of clients we work with are very much now focusing on how do we go make this real, both to drive efficiency in our organization, but also to create better customer experiences.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I went to a lot of tech conferences all around the world last year, and I saw a lot of vendors promising the world with AI, with Gen AI, while business leaders were looking increasingly nervous about, hey, well, this is my personal or company data that's being used to train these machine learning algorithms. We're kind of overcome that now up to a large extent, and we are looking at making it real. But I'm curious, from everything that you're seeing, what are the most, let's say, common internal blockers that software and platform companies are facing as they strive for this hypergrowth now?
Yeah, so on Gen AI, and I think it's worth just spending a tiny bit more time on this.
Yeah.
Because we're in these middle miles, we think that there's an opportunity to freeze, right? There's an opportunity to say, we don't know which foundation model we want to work with. Our data is a mess, but we're going to focus and invest on cleaning it up. But we're not going to go all in on baking this into customer-facing product, right? Because we can't trust the output. We see that at one end of the spectrum. And then obviously at the other end of the spectrum, if you look at what an Adobe or a Salesforce or a Microsoft is doing, it's really putting Gen AI front and center in the product with clients. Our view, though, for most players is that in this phase, you really need to be placing bets that allow optionality, right? You need to not be going in necessarily with one single model, but ensuring that you are building for an eventual future that obviously is going to be very, very heavily dependent on Gen AI. But we also don't know exactly how this is all going to play out, right? The leaders in Gen AI are not fully determined yet. And I think having optionality will be a benefit for most.
Yeah, and I know last year many businesses hit that knee-jerk reaction and just banned everyone from using it. And we've all seen what happened with BYOD and Shadow IT to know you can't stop that kind of progress. And I know you're very passionate about using generative AI as a pillar for growth. So for anybody listening, how can companies effectively integrate this technology to scale new growth opportunities? Because there are a lot of opportunities there, aren't there, right now?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's the use cases that we're seeing get the most traction today, candidly, are the internal use cases, right? They're using Gen AI to ensure that one customer support agent or one salesperson can be a bit of a superstar and be in the top 1% of their cohort. And that we think is obviously a big opportunity because it does allow you to scale faster. Sometimes it actually has implications on the size of the team that you actually need. But that's something that we're seeing happening now. And we think that's going to become real much more quickly. I do think, though, that as we look at clients of ours in the ad side of the business, there's some really interesting ways that Gen AI can enable ad-driven platforms to reach their small and medium business customers in a way that they never have before, right? To actually help them physically create their own ads without the scale of an agency, for instance, or score an ad to give them a view of how likely this is to be successful. That has real revenue implications if you get that right, So we're excited about those use cases. And we should spend a bit of time talking about the barriers, the organizational barriers that, frankly, could prevent all of this from happening if not handled correctly. But I think that we're now all sort of aligned that there's real money to be made here. It's just not necessarily something that will materialize until the technology is put in the hands of customers and managers.
Yeah, it's a great point about talking about the people aspect, the culture aspect, because I think we've both seen many times before, you can put all the latest, greatest, shiny new technology solutions in place, but that culture needs to be in place too, doesn't it? It's something that often gets neglected.
It is, and it's evolved a lot over the past 18 months, right? I mean, if we look at what's happened in tech since March of 2020, we had an extraordinary run-up in market cap, which enabled really hiring like we've never seen before in the space. And then over the past 12 months or so, we've seen, I would say, a sort of a reset, right? That actually did not take most players in this space to numbers of employees that are smaller than before COVID, but something that's more in line with a normal growth rate during that period. So I think that there's a bigger implication here that we're starting to hear CEOs in this space talk about, which is all driven by markets rewarding operating income more than growth alone, right? I mean, that is sort of the underpinning of what's going on here. And in many cases, as players that run 85% gross margin business like ad-driven platforms are investing in new areas, those new areas are not the same gross margin profile. So it sort of has an implication that we need to have leaner organizations in this space. And we would argue that the success of most is getting back to rewarding what really was rewarded about being highly innovative over the past decade. It's less about how gourmet your lunch is at work and more about solving big problems that impact the world, building great product and creating real value. That was the main driver of engagement for employees in tech since, let's look at the 2007, 2008 boom, right? It wasn't necessarily the cushy perks. And I think that cultural reset will go a long ways to retaining great employees. But the competition for great employees is going to be fierce. And we see this now with AI engineers, right? I mean, it's a scarce resource and lots of competition.
And there's a quote I use on this podcast. It must be nearly 10 years old now, from a former IBM chief. And she said that the last best experience that anyone has anywhere, that becomes the minimum expectation for the experience that we want everywhere. It's never been more appropriate. And creating outstanding user experiences is indeed crucial in the tech industry too. So what are some of the innovative strategies that companies could maybe employ to consistently deliver these winning experiences that we increasingly expect as standard?
Yeah, so we see there's a few traits of highly successful companies that are known for great user experience. And I think the fundamental one gets back to something that's frankly transformed the global economy, which is systems thinking. So it's stepping back and rather thinking about user experience from a simple product perspective, thinking about end to end. How do we make something 10x better, 10x cheaper, or 10x faster? And really refusing to settle for incremental gain. If you think about how that was applied at, let's say, an Amazon, for instance, solving delivery of a good to your house in a matter of hours, right? It changed the way we buy things, but in order to create that experience, it actually required a reinvention of the entire process from finding what you're looking for to delivering that package at the last mile. And that type of systems thinking, we think, can be and is very applicable in purely digital product. But it requires a few things, right? It requires really good upfront planning. And frankly, using data to actually qualify an investment rather than saying, we believe we know what customers want, so we're just going to go and do that. And a willingness, as companies in this space get larger, a willingness to break down silos and organizational barriers that directly prevent great experiences, right? If one side of the organization is trying to sell a customer one thing and the other side is trying to sell a customer another thing, it's kind of impossible to actually have a unified value proposition unless you're working together. And we're seeing that start to take shape. But I think the key is don't settle for incremental. That is not what defines the best experiences for customers.
And on the flip side of user and customer experience is employee experience, which is equally as important to a growth roadmap too. So how should companies in the software and platform sector approach improving employee engagement and satisfaction? It's something that businesses have been trying to solve for as long as I can remember, but what are you seeing here?
Well, I mentioned this earlier. I think this gets back candidly to having employee satisfaction tied to doing big things that have big impact on the world and less on individual benefits. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what's built Silicon Valley and the tech space broadly. And I think we're going to see a pivot back to that. So for us, it's less about the comp package, while that's important, but really ensuring employees have the wherewithal and the opportunity to, feel like they did the right thing and built something that impacted the world.
And you're probably unable to name any particular brands or businesses here, but are there any examples that spring to mind of how organizations have unlocked value from within, especially those struggling with tech and organizational debt, etc.? Is there anything that you've seen there or anything you would advise around that?
Yeah, so there absolutely is. And as we look, I mean, as you go through hypergrowth, it is incredibly messy, right?
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. We see companies that I will not name that have thousands of internal tools that they've built, or very high-paid developers doing testing work, and or Harvard-trained data analysts doing dashboarding. And I think that it starts by identifying what is at your core, right? And being willing to let what is not core for you and what defines you in the market either be done by someone else or be done by a different workforce in a different way that allows your top talent to focus on what customers are buying and paying for. It gets back to our customer experience point, right? And there's been a number of ways to unlock this. I mean, famously at Amazon, right? You can read all about this in Jeff Bezos's biography, but the two pizza team was desired to get around this, right? It was designed basically to ensure that no one team could get so bogged down by complexity that they could actually move quickly. Years ago at Meta, they solved this by creating very targeted growth teams because they found that once you had 7 friends on Facebook, you were highly likely to remain engaged on the platform and see your number of friends grow. And this is something we've been recommending to clients, right? If you're building a new business or you're trying to expand a part of your business to a new market, enabling a team to be maniacally focused on the metrics that matter and drive that can really help unlock those barriers. There's other players, though, and in fact, I would say many large players in the tech space that have incredibly fortified silos that have been built up. And within those silos, there's obviously amazing product being built, but it creates barriers when you're trying to solve quickly and turn a very large ship. And one of the things we're seeing to do that, besides just totally reorging the business, which is obviously creates lots of drama and sort of freezes things, is to focus OKRs on things that drive collaboration. I'll give you one example. At many clients that we work with in this space, there's a pretty big divide between product teams and support. So when a consumer has a bad experience and they're talking to support about it, support has some levers, right? But they can't actually solve the problem that's creating the support volume. And bringing together a set of OKRs that allows product and support to be metriced on the same thing, which generally is going to be tied to customer satisfaction, can help solve that. So there's large things that are a little bit disruptive, but there's also tactical things that we think can be done now and have real impact.
Considering the rapid pace of innovation in the software and platforms industry, how can companies maintain agility whilst also managing the complexity of their own processes and operations? Because it is often quite a tricky balance to achieve. So what are you seeing here?
Yeah, this is a tough topic. And I think we're seeing this with generative AI, right? I mean, there's generative AI has the potential, right, to sort of rewrite the leaders of tech, for sure. And it also has the opportunity to disrupt very profitable core businesses that could theoretically change in such a way that new entrants are now going to be in the lead. I think search is a topic that comes to mind very quickly on this. So for us, we're seeing the most successful players in the market really focusing on ensuring that their organizations are really wholly focused around a galvanizing topic area, and that the employee base knows exactly where the business is going. This is leadership's responsibility, but also they're using this as an opportunity to address some of those organizational barriers that I mentioned earlier that are really the sort of the blockers here, right? And a willingness finally to address the walls between silos and really creating those OKRs or metrics that allow shared success and focus on this. But it's hard because in some cultures do not reward success, whereas others very much do. So we think that organizations that reward failure are probably going to do better here, right? There will be successes and losses along this journey, and you need to really reward your employees for taking risks and taking bets. And that's not something that's core culture at every single company in this space.
And you mentioned leadership there, and although our news feeds are all about technology at the moment, how it's changing the world, it does feel like every business needs a guide of some sort to help them navigate through these uncharted digital waters. So what role do you think leadership plays in overcoming internal blockers? And as you said with that ship analogy there, steering companies towards sustainable growth, it needs that leadership, right?
Yeah, it's a requirement without a doubt. And I think we've seen a gradient of this over the past couple of years, right? We've seen players that have effectively outsourced their innovation arm. We've seen others that have done it entirely internally and have gotten sort of bogged down in some of the organizational barriers that we talked about earlier. But we believe that leadership really setting the vision and the DNA of the organization, and not just encouraging, but requiring companies to move at pace towards some of these very disruptive goals is incredibly important. And I know that sounds far easier to do than it actually is. But if you look at the DNA of some of the major players in this space, customer obsession is one thing that continually comes up. And that's one of Amazon's, for instance, core principles. And I think that there's something in that, right? Because that's a perpetual piece of their DNA that allows them to very quickly greenlight or kill new initiatives that enable or drive towards the common goal of the organization. And we believe that the companies that keep that DNA that got them to where they are today are probably going to be the most successful.
100%. And one of the things that I've learned over the last 18 months is it's become almost impossible to predict the future now. You probably disagree because you're right in the heart of that space and successfully able to do some of that stuff. But if we do look towards the future, are there any emerging trends or technologies that you think will significantly impact the S&P industry in the next few years? Anything that makes you want to jump out of bed, or are you just monitoring from afar?
We believe it's not impossible to predict the future. It's just impossible to predict the future with 100% certainty, right? With data, you can have a pretty high confidence interval of how things will shake out. For us and for me personally, I think obviously we talked a lot about Gen AI, but I think where Gen AI is going to be really interesting is in some of the use cases that benefit sort of the human good, right? As we start applying Gen AI to health, for instance, being able to get second opinions immediately, we think is a use case that's going to cause a lot of public good. Outside of Gen AI, though, I think spatial computing is one we need to watch. I mean, with the Apple Vision Pro, I think we're starting to see immersive computing as something that's now very much real. Now, maybe not at the current price point, but something that could actually change how we work and also how we consume content at home. So I'm excited about that. And I think that's probably at a tipping point. And then the other area for me personally is space. We have between SpaceX, Amazon, and others, there's now a lot of heavy equipment up in the sky that is going to enable connectivity to reach really the final billion internet users. You think about places like Africa that really don't even have high fidelity connectivity yet. And I think that's going to unlock some really interesting behavior. It's going to unlock, obviously, a whole new set of potential users, but it's also going to unlock a set of new innovators, right? Who have new ideas and have a new perspective on how to solve problems. It's really only enabled if they have great access to the internet. So I'm excited to see how that plays out in the next couple of years.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here, sharing your time and sharing your insights with everyone listening. But before I let you go, we have a bit of a tradition on this podcast. I always ask my guests to leave everyone listening with a book that they'd recommend for our Amazon wish list, or a song that means something to them. Guilty pleasures are allowed that we can add to our Spotify playlist. But all I'm going to ask is, what would you like to leave everyone with and why?
I'm going to leave you with a book that I bet no one has recommended yet. Ooh. And it's a book called Dangerous Flights by Carrie McCauley. And I have a bit of a bias for this book because I'm a pilot on the side for fun. And this book is about this guy and this cohort of people that ferry planes across oceans. And oftentimes we're talking about planes with one engine. And the book has some really interesting takeaways for me about how to behave in very disruptive environments. It's about the reality that no matter how much planning you do, there are going to be things that come up that you cannot foresee. So really putting in the time to plan and have optionality keeps you alive, frankly. And I think that it has a lot to do with foresight and the willingness to think about every possible outcome, but be willing to accept the fact that something's going to happen that you probably did not forecast. I would highly recommend it. It's a great read.
Oh, man, I'm going to be checking that out. I'll get that added straight to our wish list. And obviously, Accenture is a huge website. You've got a lot of work on there, a lot of reports, a lot of cool things. Where would you point everyone listening that just wants to find out more information and explore some of the things we talked about today?
Yeah, so Accenture.com is our website. We showcase all of our perspectives on the market there. And if you go to Accenture.com and you click on software and platforms, you can learn more about specifically what we're doing in the tech industry. We really prioritize building proprietary data that sort of represents this unique purview we have on the market. And I think your listeners would find that to be quite interesting.
Well, again, thanks for coming on, discussing the internal blockers that often hinder performance in the future, and also for providing that roadmap of the 4 pillars to prioritize software platform companies so they can embrace and scale new growth with generative AI, creating and delivering winner user experiences, focusing on employee and experience and engagement. So much value there about unlocking value from within the organization too. I think this is stuff we could talk about for hours, but just thank you for coming on here and sharing your insights today.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Appreciate it.
And that concludes our conversation with Kevan today, global lead for software and platforms at Accenture. And we've been able to gain so many invaluable insights into the internal blockers that can hinder performance and growth in the software and platforms industry, along with that strategic roadmap for overcoming some of these obstacles and embracing future opportunities. And as Kevan emphasised, the pace of change and innovation in the tech industry demands a more proactive approach. One where organisations prioritise strategic bets with AI and focus on delivering exceptional user experiences. Ultimately, by fostering a culture of employee engagement and collaboration. So let me know your thoughts on anything we discussed today by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @NeilC. But remember, in the world of technology, the possibilities are limitless. And the journey is just beginning. So let me know your thoughts on the future of software and platforms and everything in between. Let's keep this conversation going. But that's it for today. So thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.